She stood in that upscale Manhattan art gallery, a beautiful, slender black woman with a glorious crown of natural curls framing her face. But her ex-wife Jennifer saw that hair as a target. In front of designers, collectors, and the city's elite, Jennifer's voice cut through the champagne-soaked air like a blade. "I always told you how brave you were to wear it like that in professional settings. Most women wouldn't have the confidence." The word dripped with poison, the kind that had filled their 5-year marriage, the kind that made Zara want to disappear. But then the room went silent. A tall Korean man appeared behind her, dragon tattoos crawling up his neck, a suit worth more than most people's cars. Kang Min-Jun, the Viper, a mafia boss who made grown men lower their voices. And he did something he'd never done before, something that shocked everyone in that gallery. He touched her hair with a tenderness that seemed impossible from a man of his reputation. He looked at Jennifer with eyes that had ended careers and lives. And then he kissed Zara's forehead. Right there, in front of everyone. What happened next silenced the entire room and changed everything Zara thought she knew about protection, about worth, about the ghosts we carry from the people who claimed to love us. Before we start this story, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. If stories about karma, love, and hidden truths move you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The gallery hummed with the kind of quiet wealth that didn't need to announce itself. Soft jazz played from invisible speakers. Champagne flutes caught the light like tiny prisms. Women in designer dresses moved through the space with practiced grace, their laughter carefully modulated to sound spontaneous, but never loud. Zara Bennett stood near a contemporary sculpture, her phone in hand, pretending to read an email she'd already memorized. She'd been doing this for 10 minutes now, this performance of casual belonging. Her black dress was simple, elegant, bought specifically because it made her feel invisible in rooms like this. But her hair, her glorious crown of tightly coiled curls shaped into a perfect afro, made invisibility impossible. She'd almost canceled tonight. The invitation had come through a professional contact, someone who admired her graphic design work and thought she'd benefit from being seen at the right events. Zara had stood in front of her bathroom mirror for 40 minutes that evening, fingers hovering over her hair products, fighting the old urge to smooth it down, tie it back, make it smaller. That urge had a voice. It sounded like Jennifer. The gallery's glass door opened, sending a whisper of cold autumn air through the room. Zara didn't look up immediately. She was reading the same email for the 11th time, her eyes not really seeing the words, when she heard it. That laugh. The one that used to fill their shared apartment, usually right after a comment about how Zara's hair care products were taking over the bathroom, or how ethnic hairstyles might not photograph well for professional headshots. Jennifer Hartley stood in the entrance with 2 women Zara didn't recognize, all 3 of them blonde, all 3 of them scanning the room with the confidence of people who'd never questioned whether they belonged anywhere. Jennifer's eyes found Zara almost immediately. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, then something harder. Something that looked almost like offense that Zara had dared to exist in this space without permission. Zara's first instinct was to leave, find the bathroom, call a car, invent an emergency. She'd rebuilt herself in the 2 years since their divorce, but that rebuilding felt suddenly fragile, like a sandcastle watching the tide come in. But Jennifer was already moving toward her, cutting through the crowd with purpose, her friends trailing behind like elegant sharks sensing blood in the water. "Zara!" Jennifer's voice carried just far enough. Several heads turned. "What a surprise! I didn't know you frequented these kinds of events." The emphasis on "these kinds" landed exactly where Jennifer intended it to. Zara forced a smile. I was invited. Professional networking. Of course, of course. Jennifer's eyes traveled deliberately, starting at Zara's face and moving upward to her hair. The inspection was slow, theatrical, designed to be noticed. I see you're still committed to the natural look. That's so brave of you. One of Jennifer's friends, a woman in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than Zara's monthly rent, tilted her head with exaggerated curiosity. I've always wondered how you manage it. All that volume. Doesn't it take hours? It's beautiful, the other friend said quickly. Too quickly. The kind of compliment that felt like an apology for existing. So unique. Jennifer smiled, and there was something cruel in the curve of her lips. I used to tell her she could do so much with her hair if she wanted to. Straightening treatments, maybe some layers, something more polished for professional settings. She laughed, touching Zara's arm with false intimacy. But she always insisted on keeping it this way. I admired the dedication, honestly, even if it meant turning heads at every business dinner we attended. The words landed like small cuts, each one precise, each one designed to bleed slowly. Zara felt the familiar heat crawling up her neck, that old sensation of being simultaneously hyper-visible and completely erased. Jennifer had perfected this skill during their marriage, the ability to diminish someone while smiling, to wound with concern, to destroy with compliments that weren't compliments at all. She opened her mouth to respond, though she wasn't sure what words would come out. Maybe something diplomatic, maybe nothing at all. Maybe she'd just turn and walk away, proving Jennifer right about not belonging here. But then the air in the room changed. It was subtle at first, like a drop in barometric pressure before a storm. Conversations near them faltered mid-sentence. The woman in the cream dress stopped talking, her eyes fixed on something behind Zara. Even Jennifer's practiced smile flickered, uncertainty crossing her features for just a moment. Zara turned. A man stood there, and stood felt like an inadequate word for the way he occupied space. He was tall, Korean, his black suit fitted with the kind of precision that suggested custom tailoring and considerable wealth. But it wasn't the suit that commanded attention. It was something in his bearing, in the absolute stillness of his posture, in eyes that seemed to catalog everything and everyone with the efficiency of someone who'd learned early that missing details could be fatal. The dragon tattoo climbing up his neck moved slightly as he tilted his head, the ink seeming almost alive in the gallery's careful lighting. Min-Jun, the Viper. Zara knew him, though knew was perhaps too strong a word. He was a client, or rather, his import company was. She'd met with him exactly twice to discuss branding for what he called his legitimate business interests, a phrase he'd delivered with such dry irony that she'd almost laughed. Both meetings had been brief, professional, conducted in boardrooms with his lawyers present. She'd never seen him like this, in a social setting, without the buffer of conference tables and legal documents. He moved with deliberate slowness, closing the distance between them, and Zara watched Jennifer's expression shift from confusion to something that might have been recognition, though recognition of what, Zara couldn't say. "You were taking too long at the bar, my love," Min-Jun said, his English accented but flawless, each word precisely chosen. His hand found the small of Zara's back with the kind of casual intimacy that suggested long familiarity. "I thought perhaps you'd gotten lost." Zara's mind stuttered. "My love." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and yet delivered with such absolute conviction that for a moment, even she almost believed them. Jennifer's smile had frozen on her face, confusion warring with something else. The two friends had gone completely silent, and Zara noticed now that several other people in the gallery had turned to watch, their conversations abandoned entirely. We were just, Jennifer started, but Min-Jun's attention had already shifted to her, and whatever she'd been about to say died under the weight of his gaze. He didn't look angry. That would have been easier to process. Instead, he looked at Jennifer the way a scientist might examine a particularly unremarkable specimen, with a detached curiosity that somehow felt more cutting than any open hostility. "Ah," he said simply. "You must be Jennifer." The way he said her name made it sound like an accusation. Jennifer recovered quickly, extending her hand with the kind of forced brightness that came from years of networking events and corporate dinners. "I am. And you are?" Min-Jun didn't take her hand. He simply stood there, his palm still resting against Zara's back, and the deliberate rejection of Jennifer's gesture echoed louder than any words. "We were just catching up," Jennifer continued, lowering her hand with only the slightest flush coloring her cheeks. "Zara and I used to be married. I was just saying how wonderfully authentic she is with her appearance choices. That hair!" She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I always told her she was so brave to wear it like that, especially in professional settings. Most women wouldn't have the confidence." The word confidence dripped with implication. The kind that suggested the opposite. The kind that had filled their marriage like poison gas, invisible but lethal. Min-Jun's hand moved, slowly, deliberately. He reached up and touched Zara's hair. The entire gallery seemed to hold its breath. His fingers moved through her curls with a gentleness that seemed impossible from a man whose reputation preceded him like a shadow. The dragon on his neck shifted as he tilted his head slightly, studying the texture of her hair with the kind of reverent attention usually reserved for priceless artifacts. He wasn't performing. He wasn't making a point. He was simply touching her hair as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if he'd done it 1,000 times before. Zara couldn't breathe. She stood frozen, acutely aware that every eye in the gallery was now on them, that conversations had stopped entirely, that even the jazz seemed to have faded into background static. "Authentic," Min-Jun repeated, his voice low and measured. Each syllable weighted with something dangerous. What an interesting word to choose. Jennifer's smile wavered. One of her friends took a small step backward, a movement so subtle it might have been unconscious, the instinctive retreat of prey recognizing a predator. "I meant it as a compliment," Jennifer said quickly, but her voice had lost its confident edge. "I was always trying to help her during our marriage, you know. Help her fit in better at professional events, help her understand how presentation matters in certain circles." "Help her," Min-Jun said. And somehow he made those two words sound like an indictment. His hand was still in Zara's hair, his fingers moving through the curls with that same careful reverence. "Or shame her?" The question landed like a stone in still water, ripples of uncomfortable silence spreading outward. Several people nearby shifted positions, some turning away, as if to give privacy to a confrontation they desperately wanted to witness, but knew they shouldn't. Jennifer's face flushed. "That's not fair. I was trying to—" "My mother had curly hair," Min-Jun interrupted, his voice still quiet but carrying an edge now, sharp as a blade. "Tighter curls than Zara's. Beautiful, natural. My father told her it looked unkempt, unprofessional, embarrassing for a man of his position." He paused, and in that pause, Zara could feel the weight of something old and unhealed. She straightened it every single day. Chemical treatments that burned her scalp. I was 7 years old when I first heard her crying in the bathroom. smelling the smoke of her own hair burning, because my father had invited business associates for dinner, and she needed to look appropriate. Jennifer had gone very still. Her friends were no longer even pretending to be part of this conversation. They stood like statues, witnesses to something they hadn't anticipated and couldn't escape. Min-Jun's hand left Zara's hair and moved to her face, his palm cupping her cheek with the same impossible gentleness. He turned her slightly toward him, and Zara found herself looking up into eyes that held a lifetime of carefully controlled fury. So when I hear someone describe natural hair as brave, he continued, his gaze never leaving Zara's face, even though his words were clearly meant for Jennifer. When I hear someone suggest that a woman's hair needs to be managed or tamed or made more professional, I don't hear helpfulness. I hear the same voice my father used. The voice that killed something in my mother years before her body stopped breathing. The silence in the gallery was absolute now. Even the background music seemed to have stopped, though Zara knew that was impossible, just her brain filtering out everything except this moment, this man, these words that were rewriting years of internalized shame in real time. Min-Jun leaned down slowly, giving Zara every opportunity to pull away, and pressed his lips to her forehead. The kiss was long, deliberate, achingly tender. A public declaration from a man who, according to everything Zara had heard about him, never made public declarations of anything. When he pulled back, his eyes finally shifted to Jennifer. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The look said everything. It said, "I see exactly what you are." It said, "Your power here is over." It said, "This woman is under my protection now, and you will never diminish her again." Jennifer's carefully constructed composure cracked. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came out. It was illuminating to meet Zara's former acquaintances, Min-Jun said, the pause before acquaintances making it clear he'd considered and rejected several other words. I'm sure she's grateful to have moved past that chapter of her life. He offered his arm to Zara, the gesture formal, old-fashioned, completely at odds with the modern setting, but somehow perfect in its deliberateness. Zara took it, her hand trembling slightly as it curved around his bicep, feeling the coiled strength beneath the expensive fabric of his suit. They walked toward the exit, their footsteps the only sound in a room full of frozen people. Zara could feel Jennifer's stare burning into her back, could sense the shifting dynamics, the whispered questions that would explode the moment they left. The social recalibration happening in real time as everyone present reassessed who Zara Bennett actually was. The cold October air hit them as they stepped outside, shocking after the gallery's controlled climate. Min-Jun guided her away from the entrance, around the corner to where the street noise provided cover, where curious eyes from the gallery windows couldn't follow. Only then did he release her arm and step back, putting professional distance between them once again. Zara's hands were shaking. She pressed them together, trying to still the tremor. Why did you do that? The question came out barely above a whisper. We've met twice. You don't even know me. Min-Jun pulled a cigarette from his jacket pocket, an expensive silver case that caught the streetlight. He didn't light it immediately, just held it between his fingers, looking at it as if it held answers to questions she hadn't asked. My mother's name was Hewan, he said quietly. It means graceful garden. But there was nothing graceful about how my father broke her. Small cruelties, day after day, comments about her appearance, her cooking, her inability to meet his standards, always wrapped in concern, always delivered with a smile. He lit the cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating the sharp angles of his face. I was 12 when I found her in the bathroom. Chemical burns covering her scalp from another straightening treatment gone wrong. She was crying so hard she couldn't breathe, and I just stood there, useless, frozen. I didn't protect her. I never protected her. Zara's throat tightened. She understood now. This hadn't been about her at all. When I saw that woman speaking to you, I saw my mother 30 years ago, Min-Jun continued, smoke curling from his lips into the night air. Same tone, same false concern masking real cruelty. Same way of making someone feel small while claiming to help them grow. He looked at Zara directly then, and there was something raw in his expression, something unguarded. I couldn't stand by silent again. I wouldn't. Thank you, Zara said, and the words felt inadequate for what had just happened, for the public validation she'd never thought she'd receive, for the way he'd seen through Jennifer's performance to the poison beneath. Nobody ever stood up for me like that. Min-Jun dropped the cigarette, crushing it under his shoe with deliberate precision. Our meeting Wednesday is still scheduled? The logo design consultation? The abrupt shift to business should have felt jarring, but somehow it didn't. It felt like him offering her normalcy, a return to the professional relationship they actually had, rather than the performance they'd just delivered. Zara found herself smiling. A real smile. The first genuine one she'd managed all evening. 2 o'clock. I'll have 3 concepts ready for your review. Good. He started to walk away, then paused, turning back. Zara, that woman in there was wrong about everything. Your hair isn't brave. Bravery implies fear overcome. Your hair is simply glorious. And anyone who can't see that, anyone who spent years trying to convince you otherwise, doesn't deserve even a second of your mental space. He disappeared into the shadows between streetlights, moving with the same predatory grace he'd shown in the gallery, and then he was gone, swallowed by the city. Zara stood alone on the sidewalk, her hand moving unconsciously to touch her hair, fingers sliding through the curls that had been weapons used against her for so long. But they felt different now. Not different in texture or appearance, but different in meaning. Reclaimed, validated, hers. Inside the gallery, through the window, she could see Jennifer surrounded by her friends, hands gesturing animatedly, face flushed with what might have been anger or embarrassment, or both. People were watching Jennifer now with different eyes, the kind of eyes that had seen behind the curtain, that understood what kind of person smiled while delivering cruelty. Zara pulled out her phone and called a car. While she waited, she deleted Jennifer's number from her contacts, a tiny act she'd been too afraid to do for 2 years, as if keeping that number had been some kind of safety net, some proof that she'd once been chosen by someone. She didn't need that proof anymore. The car arrived, and Zara slid into the back seat, watching the gallery recede through the rear window. She thought about Min-Jun's mother, about Hae-won, whose name meant graceful garden, but who'd been systematically destroyed by 1,000 small cuts disguised as care. She thought about how trauma echoes across generations, how sometimes protection comes from the most unexpected places, how one public moment of validation could rewrite years of private diminishment. And she thought about Wednesday's meeting, about presenting logo concepts to a man who'd just reminded her that she was worth defending, even from ghosts, especially from ghosts. If this story moved you, pause for a moment and reflect. Have you ever been made to feel like something beautiful about you needed to be hidden or changed? Have you witnessed someone use concern as camouflage for cruelty? Or have you ever had the courage to stand up for someone when their dignity was under attack, even when it wasn't your fight to take? Share your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read every single one. And if you believe in stories about dignity, healing, and the courage to reclaim what was taken from you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.